Hi, I am Raghu, and in this second video in the series of Python with Raspberry Pi Pico, I will talk about how to install the micropython onto the Raspberry Pi Pico and also give a brief introduction about how to use an IDE and which IDE we'll be using to connect to the Raspberry Pi Pico. So we will be using the Pane IDE. Pane is one of the popular IDEs for Python, and it has direct support for MicroPython. And MicroPython is what will be loaded into this Raspberry Pi Pico. So that's what we'll learn in this session. And I'll also at the end of the session, by the end of the session, you should be able to actually start your first Raspberry Pi Pico application. And that will be a hello world. And in the embedded applications, the hello world is a blinking of LEDs. So if you've written normal programs, any program, Python, Java, C, C++, the first program that you'd be doing is a hello world. In the world of embedded programming, the equivalent of the hello world is to make LEDs to blink. The Raspberry Pi Pico has a built-in LED here. Now if you could see here, there is a built-in LED here, and we'll make that LED to blink continuously. So that's what we'll be doing in this series. So let's get started. Now let's see how to load MicroPython into Raspberry Pi Pico and start writing Python programs. To write Python programs, you will need an IDE. That is, an integrated development environment. There are several IDEs out there, but I will use Pane IDE, which is very easy to use and great for beginners. And Pane has built-in support for MicroPython. First of all, let us load MicroPython into the Raspberry Pi Pico. There are two different ways to do this. Let me start with a more easier way first, and then I will explain about the second method also. For the first method, you will need the latest version of Pane IDE installed on your system. That is, a version which is at least 3.3.5 or higher. This is the version that has built-in support for MicroPython. Based on your operating system, you can install Pane by following the instructions in the following URL: https pane.org. On the home page itself, there are instructions on how to download and install for different platforms. So download the right version and install Pane, but don't start it yet. Now that we've installed Pane, let's load MicroPython onto the Raspberry Pi Pico. First of all, start the Pico in boot cell mode. To start in boot cell mode, press the boot cell push button and keep it pressed. Now, plug in the micro USB cable into the Pico. Of course, the other side of the micro USB cable must be inserted into your computer's USB port. After a couple of seconds, release the boot cell push button. Now, start Pane. When Pane starts up, it shows a blank editor and a blank shell. The top canvas is called the editor pane. This is where you'll write all your applications. The bottom pane is the shell pane. This is where Pane shows information about the execution. When you first start, it says that the interpreter running is Python 3.xxx, which is the version of Python that Pane will be running. Please note that in future this version would change. It could change, but as of now it is 3.x.x. At this stage, you will be able to use Pane to run regular Python programs on your desktop. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to be able to run Python programs on the Raspberry Pi Pico. So let's now go ahead and set up Pane and Pico to do this. Now in Pane, click on the Run Interpreter menu item. From the drop-down for which interpreter or device should Pane use, select MicroPython for Raspberry Pi Pico. Because we put the Pico in the boot mode, Tony will now ask you if you want to upload the latest version of MicroPython to the Pico board. Just say install, and that's it. Once the installation completes, we are ready to go. Now let's come to the second method. If you already installed using the previous method that I told you, you can ignore this section. But if you don't want to use Tony, there is another way to load MicroPython onto the Pico. First of all, start the Pico in boot mode by pressing the boot cell button and connecting it to the USB port. Make sure that the Pico's file system appears as a drive on your file system. It's just like any other pen drive. Now download the latest MicroPython binary from the Raspberry Pi Pico site. As of this tutorial recording, the URL for the Raspberry Pi MicroPython binary is as shown below. Now click on Get Started with MicroPython, and then you'll be taken to the Get Started with MicroPython page. In this page, locate the downloadable UF2 and click on this link and save the UF2 file to your computer. After the download is completed, just drag and drop the file to the Pico file system. And that's it. Your Pico is now set up to run MicroPython. Now that we're ready with the setup, let's go and get our first Pico program running. Let's start with the typical Hello World program. In the world of embedded development, the equivalent of a Hello World program is LED blinking. The Raspberry Pi Pico has a built-in LED on the PCB. Let's make this to blink. In the Tony IDE's development window, write the following code. At this stage, let's not worry about what each line does. I will explain about each one of these in some of the later tutorials as appropriate. Let's begin the excitement by just getting a first program to work. Save this file by clicking on File, Save. When you click on Save, Tony will ask you if you want to save it on the local computer or save it on the Pico. Right now, we'll save it on the computer. When you choose MicroPython as the interpreter, Tony will ask you this question every single time you try to open a file or do save as. If you choose Pico, then the file gets saved to the Pico's flash. We will see later on as to why you would want to do this. That is, why you would want to put the binary into the Pico's flash. Once you saved, click on the Run button, which is the green play icon on the toolbar. Voila! The LED starts blinking. Click on the stop icon and the LED stops blinking. So that's great. We've written a first program with the Raspberry Pi Pico. Before trying to understand more about Python, GPIO or Pico, I would like to give a quick overview about the important parts of Tony IDE. When you start Tony, you'll see that there are two main windows. One on the top where you write your code and one on the bottom which is the shell. Of course, like in all applications, you have the menu bar and the toolbar icons. When we try out the Hello World, we already saw how to write code in the development pane. In the bottom shell pane, you can see messages that our Python interpreter prints out. You can also use this pane to run interactive command without actually writing and saving the code. For example, if you type print hello world, the interpreter would print out this message on the interactive shell. This message is just the hello world. Or you could type the whole program to change the state of the LED. Just type these three lines. The first line is from machine import pin, LED equals pin 25, comma pin out, LED.toggle. As soon as you type LED.toggle and click on enter, you will see that the state of the LED on the board toggles. That is, if the LED was previously on, it becomes off. Or if the LED was previously off, it becomes on. Tony's file and edit menu are similar to most applications with options to save, save as, copy, paste, etc. The view menu has options for debugging, which is more of an advanced topic. The run menu again has several options for debugging. There are two options that I would like to highlight here. The first one is the select interpreter, which we've already used right in the beginning. You can use this option to select between micropython running on the Pico or regular Python running on your computer. The run option is used to execute the current script, that is the script on your development window. This can also be accessed using the run toolbar icon. The stop or restart option can be used to stop execution of the current program. This can also be accessed using the stop icon in the toolbar. The tool menu has various menu options that is used to configure your Tony preferences. And the help menu, of course, is similar to any other application. So with this much of introduction to MicroPython with Pico and Tony, we are ready to move on to the next tutorial. Let's do that. Hope you enjoyed this session and have got a good understanding of the concepts that we learned here. So let's move on to the next session in this series of programming a Raspberry Pi Pico using Python. So see you soon.